Hello and welcome back to another Dagger devlog. So a lot's been done since the last episode, and I have some really exciting changes that I can't wait to go over. So let's jump right into what we've got. Animation fixes, killable support, item inventory system, object display camera, updated the Unity version, started on the environment, multiplayer research. It's a mouthful, I know, and I'm really happy with the progress so far. First off, I updated a lot of the player's state machine, relocating where all of its components are and all that fun stuff. Tons of interesting stuff that I'm sure you're all very keen to hear about. Rather than dive into all of the technical stuff, I'm going to go over the animation fixes that I made. The main issue I have with the animations right now is that they just didn't feel like they were actually hitting the floor. A lot of them kind of just levitated a little bit off of the ground. So my first task was to actually just attempt to make it so that they were fully flat on the ground. So this is what we got so far. As you can see, the rolling looks a lot more fluid now and it's actually hitting the ground, so it looks a little bit more impactful. I also wanted to make sure that the states were blending the animations correctly and adjusted some of the end times of the animations so that you can attack right after you're doing a roll. This is going to be a big part of my game, is the ability to mesh different abilities together and create some really cool combat. So the next thing on my list of things to get done was to make it so that our player was killable and has some kind of a health stat. So we now have the ability to neck our character. I want to make sure I design this in a way where we're taking into account the fact that we're going to have different types of enemies and armor stats and all kinds of defenses and things like that. So let me go over how it works. So the way that it works is your human object has health, has killable, and it has defense. Now, if we take a look at the killable object, you can see here we have a health object and a defense object. The defense is optional, the health is not. So any killable object needs to have health. Then what I do is when we run a damage calculation, we pass in a damage action. The damage action runs a check against the defense. So if we have a defense object, we will defend against this action. So any defense stats that you have in the future, which will be added later, will be reduced. So it'll do some kind of a subtraction from the amount that you've passed in the damage action. It grabs the adjustment from the health, so we run an adjustment on the health, and then we fire an event. And so this is how we're doing it right now. We can listen to these key events from any object using the event listeners. So we have one here on our human for a health event listener and a dead event listener. And these will be fired when any creature, or any human I should say, dies within the game console. You can make it specific by creating a new event channel for a player health event or a player dead event. It's also worth noting you can customize the max health, and a lot more parameters will come for the health later on. The way we can deal damage to our creatures now is we just run creature.killable.damage and then pass in a new damage action with a specified amount. This will deal that amount of damage with the defense suppression. Now we have the inventory system. So this is one of the major updates in this latest devlog. And I started off doing this from scratch with my own item and weapon system. I quickly realized that this was going to be a massive task, so I figured I might as well explore for some sample implementations that I could draw from, which is where I discovered the ultimate inventory system asset. So I figured I would give it a go and try and integrate it, since I already had the asset. So about an hour into the process of learning UIS, I realized pretty quickly that this wasn't going to be very straightforward to integrate, and it required a lot of learning. I think there were about 20 videos I had to watch, and they were all 20 plus minutes long, and it still didn't cover everything that was needed to know about the item system and the inventory database and equipment slots and all of this stuff. So I sat down, buckled in, and started learning. A few hours into learning the system, I realized that this wasn't going to integrate very smoothly with my system that I currently have in place for my items and weapons. So I tried to see if there would be a way for me to hybrid this and My main concern was that I really didn't want to run into an issue where I was constantly having to deal with the integration problems of another asset. When you build it up from scratch, it's easy to maintain, it's easy to understand what's happening, and it's easy to change. You have the flexibility to do what you want with your own code. As soon as you start dealing with an asset, if you want it to be a maintainable asset with bug fixes, when they do updates, you can't edit their source code. So I wanted to figure out if there was a way to do this without editing their code, and I think I came up, after many hours of design, research, and implementation, I came up with a really nice hybrid approach that worked perfectly for me. What I was able to do was make sure that the UIS asset was interfacing with my item implementation. So all of my item data and my ability system data, things like that require items in different cases, they all interface with the UIS. And I don't create any new UIS items that would be manipulated by my system. I always interface it and kind of mesh the two together and then utilize that in my own code. The hardest part of this implementation, I think, was getting the item equipping working so that the animations were shifting and all of my existing data that I'd already set up for item equipping would carry over in their system with the right hooks. So luckily there were events I could hook into, and there was a way to attach scriptable objects to my items, and so that made it perfect. Here you can see I have an item on the ground. This item is actually considered a pickup item. So if I hit the action key, you can see here we've picked up the item. So now let's open up our inventory, which we've started working on. I put a bit of effort into the inventory so far. So here you can see we have our inventory grid. We have these two items, the greatsword we started with, the katana we just picked up. You'll also notice that up here we have tabs. So we have here a weapons tab that we're in. We have an armor tab, which has a whole bunch of different armors in it for testing. The food tab, the potion tab, and these items are all categorized and their data structure has been defined with inheritance and all of the good stuff that you'd expect from an item database. So what we can go ahead and do now is actually equip these. So you'll notice that the character behind the menu, let's just go back, has now equipped the greatsword. We can do the same with the katana. And all of the animations translate over, and the items are defining the animations. Pretty nice. So we now have the ability to add as many items as we want, including consumables, materials, anything that we could think of. We now have the ability to implement that with an inventory system. I can even make it so that enemies have inventories and they'll drop items, which I'll be demonstrating maybe in the next devlog, depending on whether or not we get to the enemy AI, but we'll see. I think I'll be working on collisions first. But anyway, you can see that the inventory system has come a long way, and that's really exciting. And again, I didn't have to reinvent the wheel. I just went with an asset and made it a hybrid kind of approach where we were able to take the data and reuse our own data. And it's working really well so far. I have a lot to learn still in that regard, but I'm really confident with it. It's also worth noting that the inventory that you saw there in the demonstration had many iterations over it. It started off looking very rudimentary. Unfortunately, I lost the footage. Otherwise, I would have included that process. But as you can see, it's turned out really nice. I took a lot of inspiration from the Breath of the Wild. And yeah, I'm really happy with it so far. It's obviously going to look a lot different later. I'll revamp it, give it some flair and some uniqueness and make it look like its own thing. But yeah, it's looking really good. So having put together the whole inventory system, I kind of felt that there was a need to have a way to display our character in the inventory menu. So it got me thinking, how could I do this? And I found a number of good resources on ways to capture your character, and a lot of them were talking about, you clone your character object and then add a way to spin around, make it rotate. And those ways didn't really appeal to me too much. Then I came across a really nice tutorial by the name, I can't remember his name. I'll put his link in the description. But basically, the way that this worked was that we create a separate camera, we copy our a display of our character, so we're not cloning the object, and then we have this camera rotate around your player, and then we can set up all these different parameters, and it would block out the background, so only certain things are being captured by the camera, and in this case it would just be the player. And then it gives us the ability to create what I call an object display camera. So that's what we went ahead and did, and it turned out fantastic. So here we have the demo scene with our player rendered, and you can see on the right side that the player is rendering in two locations. So you can see him on the ground there, and you can also see him rendered somewhere else. Now if I click into here and I move, you'll notice that it's not moving. This is just a static image now. So what that is that's the display template that we're creating. We're basically taking a snapshot of the front of our character here, and that is allowing us to create this nice display. So now if I click on this character and we turn, you'll see that we're able to click and turn and drag him. So we have and you'll notice that the actions that are being performed are exactly what we're seeing on our character. So this is just a way of projecting our character, and it's really nice. You'll also notice that there's lighting on him, so there's also a light attached to this. So, first of all, you'll notice that when I rotate him, the camera is just rotating around him, and that's what's creating the projection in this template, and it looks really good. But you'll notice there's a light also. So one of the problems is if you're in a dark area, the light is also going to be captured from your player, and you won't be able to see your player if you're in a cave or something like that. And that wouldn't be good. So what I do is I project a forward light, a directional light onto the character, and then that way it maintains a consistent lighting at all times, no matter where you are. And it'll ignore the directional lighting from the sun, the global directional lighting. So there you have it. So now we're going to integrate that with our inventory system. So now I've added the display canvas and camera to the inventory. So now let's see what that turned out like. There you have it. Now you could imagine how hard this would be if we were just cloning our character and creating a different object. Every time we did an action, we would have to update our clone. Whereas with this approach, we just maintain all of our functionality, and we're just scanning our actual character model. So we're getting a perfectly accurate view with very little effort. So I'm super happy with how this turned out. And again, this took a decent amount of time and was a very iterative process. But we got there, and I am super happy with it. It's also worth mentioning that the object display camera is not limited to just the player. It can be used on any object in our scene. So for example, if I copy the player's display camera and canvas, we can assign that to, say for example, our dummy character here. So if we click on our canvas and we drag in our dummy transform into the settings, and we also need to switch our dummy to a UI display, which tells it to render, and we hit play, we should be able to see a display. And there you have it. So you can kind of see the power of this. I could use this in many different scenarios. I could use it on foliage, and if, when you're picking up items, maybe I could have a render of the model, and it gives you the ability to look around the model. There's probably tons of stuff. Maybe a crafting station would have the ability to rotate around the items. So pretty handy thing, and yeah, it's looking really good. Alright, so that brings us to what, in my opinion, is the grand finale of this devlog, and that is the environment. So I spent a ton of time working on the environment, trying to get the right aesthetic, and what I have so far is, in my opinion, a fantastic start to the aesthetic of our game. So without further ado, here's what we've got. So the environment you're seeing in front of you right now is an asset pack called Hex Tile. The author has done a fantastic job of capturing exactly what I'm looking for in our game. It has that stylized, clean, shadowy, foggy kind of atmosphere. And when you really zoom in on the detail of the trees and the foliage and the lighting, it's very polished and smooth and just exactly what I'm looking for. Now, this pack might not be exactly what we finish with in this game, but it at least gives me a really good foundation to start working off and start to learn how to create the environment, how to map things out, what's required, is there some kind of an editor I need, and I'm really looking forward to that process. This will probably happen in the next devlog, if we can get to that. So I have this beautiful environment now, and so I figured I'd try and get my player into the scene and see if we can start porting over our prototype so we can have some kind of an actual environment to walk around in. And so I started off by importing him in, and the scaling's a little off. He looks like he could cut the trees down with his sword. So I'm gonna have to fix that. Next, I needed to make sure that our environment had a mesh of some sort so that we could actually walk around in all of the tiles. Alright, so now that we got all of that sorted out, I figured our player model was overdue for a haircut. So let's see what we can do. 2 vanilla, 2 tire tread, 2 corporate, 2 molding, 2 military. Pretty sure we just saw this one. Nani? This one actually sort of looks like my haircut. Very Japanese. We're getting there, I can feel it. Ooh. Not quite. Perfection. Now he needs a beard. And save. So our beautiful player object is ready to jump into the game with a brand new environment. Let's check it out. Apart from the players getting caught on the mesh colliders, which need to be optimized, it's looking and feeling great. Well, there you have it folks. We made it to the end of another devlog, and I managed to survive. This one was a tough one, but I feel like I'm really starting to get into the groove of things now. I think going forward we're going to be getting more polished content, and I'm hoping that we're going to get just as much development done. So thanks so much for sticking around, and I hope that this was enjoyable for you guys, and until next time, take care.